Welcome to session FSI203, Personalizing Banking at Scale with Machine Learning on AWS. My name is Rob Butcher. I'm a solution architect and a proud member of AWS's Global Financial Services team, and I'm based in London. Delivering machine learning workloads at scale is hard. And banks and other large financial services institutions need to deliver machine learning workloads at scale. At any given point in time, these organizations may have hundreds, potentially thousands of ML models as part of their delivery pipeline. Customers typically face two main challenges. Problem number one, they just can't deliver those ML workloads quickly enough. So from somebody standing up in front of a whiteboard and saying, hey guys, I've got a great idea for a new ML model, to that model actually getting into production can often take more than a year. The business, meanwhile, really need those workloads to be delivered in weeks. Problem number two, siloed data. Data science teams really need to be able to access data from across the whole organization. But frequently, they lack a secure, well-governed mechanism for doing so. As a result, some occasions, the teams just can't find the data they need. And even if they can, they often end up duplicating that data, and that data can go stale. This is exactly the situation our customer, NatWest Group, formerly known as the Royal Bank of Scotland, found themselves in just 18 months ago. And it has been an absolute pleasure to work with NatWest over the last year and a half as they have totally transformed the way that they deliver machine learning workloads with SageMaker. I think what's really exciting is that we now have a major bank who've gone on the record and shared an awful lot of detail about how they're using the various SageMaker services. And to my mind, this really sort of puts to rest the question of whether SageMaker is a suitable platform for large, complex organizations operating in highly regulated industries. In the second half of this session, we're going to be hearing from the bank's head of data science, Greg Cowan. And Greg will describe in detail the precise issues that NatWest were facing, how those were overcome using various SageMaker services, and the results that have been achieved to date. But first, we're going to hear about the bank's overall data strategy and about the really fascinating work that the bank are doing around personalization and improving journeys for their customers. And for that, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage the bank's inspirational Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Zachary Anderson.
Set the standard a little lower. Inspiration's kind of hard.
Go for it.
Hello, everybody. Before we talk about our ML ops journey, I wanted to just give you a little context for the bank and what we're doing and why. Because although, as a data scientist myself, we love building models, we don't just build them to build models. We're not academics, after all. We could have all stayed there. And so NatWest, if you haven't heard of it, is one of the 4 major banks in the UK. We have about 19 million customers. We process about a quarter of all payments transactions in the UK and a very large portion of the sterling transactions globally. And I think the important thing here for me is that we have been on a real journey to build out our overall analytics and data science capabilities. In the last 2 years, we've hired over 500 data scientists and ML engineers, and we are rapidly expanding that capacity. But let me tell you why that is. So in 2020, the bank rolled out a new strategy and a new purpose. And that is to help our customers thrive. And our customers in NatWest circumstance are both retail, so personal individuals, and commercial. Our bank is split about half and half, which is a great thing because it gives us a really heterogeneity, or a lot of heterogeneity in our data set to observe people's spending and their daily behaviors, which gives us a really unique data set for personalization. But the reason that we're driving personalization is really to help our customers try to manage their financial well-being better. And that's just a really big push. And we do that mostly through engagement of our mobile app and our digital sphere, but also through our relationship managers directly through next best actions to give them prompts to go and talk to the customers. And over the last few years, our goal has been to just really ramp that up. And when I mean ramp that up, let me give you a little bit of an example. So when I started at the bank in 2020, we usually had about less than 500,000 clicks on our in-app mobile prompts. And those were mostly sales prompts, hey, it looks like you're shopping for a mortgage because we saw you on our mortgage page. Why don't you buy your mortgage with us? Those kinds of things. And that was about a 0.4% click-through rate, which is pretty crazily low, actually. Over the last 3 years, we have been more than doubling that. This year, we'll do more than 10 million positive clicks on our mobile app and digital prompts. So from 500,000 to more than 10 million. Our goal is actually to 10x that again over the next couple of years so that we are really having a conversation on a daily and weekly basis with every one of our digitally active customers. And that means a huge increase in the models that we need to develop. When I came to the bank in 2020, we had almost models on cloud, a handful of models that were ML, and almost none of them internally developed. Because really, the way that we bring personalization to life, especially at the millions of customer scale, has to be through ML and models and automatically generated insights, and then pushing out and optimizing what we present to them. So our strategy for data has been scale and optimize a number of good assets that we already had, to leverage our data for good. And this is really an important part of what we're doing here is to shift the way that we use our customer data, not just to sell more, but to actually help them. The way that we talk about that in the bank, for example, is to shift, again, using that mobile prompt space, to shift the number of messages that we send out to people from about 90% sales messages and about 10% helpful to, we would actually like to ultimately flip that to more like 80% helpful and 10% sales. Right now, we're kind of running in the 40% range of helpful, but that's still a huge growth. It means a lot of content has to be generated in order for us to do that, and that's, again, really where the ML models come from. And then really to focus on what our customers need. Let me give you a little example of what I mean by messages, because that can be a little bit abstract. So for us, we're really trying to find insights about our customers that can help them live better. In the UK, we have an almost universal free access to ATM machines, so no interbank charges. But there are a few cash machines that charge. They tend to be in lower income neighborhoods and in places where there aren't as many main bank ATMs. What we saw was there were a number of our lower income customers were using these higher charge rate machines quite frequently. So we designed, actually we did a number of analyses and models to be able to predict who that was and who best would be responding to a message, and then designed a personalized note to them through the mobile app that said, hey, it looks like in the last 30 days you've spent £300 on ATM fees, and the ATM that you typically use is less than a quarter of a mile away from a free ATM or whatever that is. And then personalize that and deliver it to every one of our customers. The impact has been, when we launched that earlier this year, that we've now saved over £500,000 for customers observable by them actually switching frequent ATM usages. And that was as of June. I don't actually know what the most recent number is, but pretty big impacts for people that really couldn't afford to be using those types of ATMs. Similarly, we've put in a number of fraud messages. In the United Kingdom, one of the biggest frauds is Amazon fraud, which is package fraud. So basically send somebody a text message or an email that says, hey, your package is delayed, please click here, give us your payment information. And so we were doing some analysis of who was likely to be defrauded by that, who clicked on those type of messages from our fraud analytics, and we built a set of models that would predict that, and then we targeted those people with education around actually how that fraud works, how you can detect it, how you can avoid it. The result was one of the highest click-through rate messages that we've ever done, and we had a reduction in the fraud for those customers by 50%. So real impacts for real customers. They don't necessarily help the bank, help our customers every day. The benefit for the bank is that those channels that we're sending those messages through become much more relevant for the customer, and we build trust and a relationship with them that when it is time for them to buy a mortgage or to take out a loan, they think of us first, they come to our channels, they don't go to brokers as much. And so the benefits for the bank are quite good. It's quite a great synergy. We actually reduce the selling and we increase the sales. But the problem was that at that same time, the few ML models that we had were taking over a year to go into production. So if you want to move from, 500,000 clicks to 10 million clicks, you want to move from one model in production to thousands, you need to radically change the way that you are developing models. And that's what we've done in the bank. And we really focused on three things. And they were, at least in part, me being a pain in the ass for Greg, who you'll see later. But we would have great ideas of things like, hey, Amazon fraud's the #1 fraud among our customers, let's go solve that. All right, Greg, go get the team spun up and work on it. And then I'd come back a week later and say, have you started? Does anybody have hands on keyboard? Is there code being written? Let me see the results. No, we don't have an environment yet. We're still going through privacy. And then I'd come back a week later and ask them again, have we started? What's happening? And so starting was a big deal for us. Just getting the place for our analysts and our data scientists to work was a big issue. And then obviously the end of the process is also, as always with models, a pain in the ass. So getting to production, you've done your estimations, you've done your hard work, and engineering that microservice so that people can actually put that into production and the message will get sent or the model will do its regular scoring was quite difficult. And so we've done a number of things to improve our pipeline to live and our pipeline into production. And then finally, I think the next horizon for us is really data sharing. And I'll talk about that a little bit around how we've built out our internal data sharing, but also starting to look at how we might share with other non-competitive banks and learn from them at the same time and rapidly accelerate our ability to put these messages into place and have a positive impact on our customers' lives. So I'll let Greg, Dave is the other data scientist, Anyway, I'll let Greg tell you about the process of solving some of my challenges to him.
Organization that takes too long to get something done, or how many of you have ever worked in an organization where you can't get your data science or ML workloads adopted at scale across the enterprise? Yeah, quite a few hands, good. How many of you had a chief data officer who calls you up every week to ask if something's done? So what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is really just give you a flavor of what NatWest Group have done in the data science space, what we've built with AWS, and how that's helping us achieve some of the goals that Zach has mentioned with regards to being faster to start, getting things live quicker, and giving that more personal experience to our customers through ML and automation. So I think as many of you will know, as a data scientist, we love building models, we love looking at data, and we love working it in our notebooks to get some insight. When I started with the bank 4 years ago, we were really focused on how do we get that insight? How do we just build these models to find some solutions? But we quickly realized that this wasn't enough, okay? Having data scientists working in their notebooks in isolation wasn't sufficient to get that insight into the hands of the people who could action it to then give that personal experience to our customers. So as many organizations have done over the past few years, they've gone on a journey, and they now really understand that to have those ML solutions driving that insight and that automation, the ML part just sits at the center of a much bigger picture. You have to think much more about not only how to create the models themselves, but also how to collect the data, how to verify the data, the serving infrastructure you need to then get those adopted at scale, how to monitor the health of the models. And all of that then forms this much larger picture that you have to think about in order to go faster and to get that value from your data much more quickly. So what we've done over the past 2 years really is work in collaboration with AWS to help realize our vision of trying to achieve this at NatWest Group. right from the start of that engagement, we had we were laser focused on some metrics that we could use to really tell the story of where we are now and where we want to go to. These were our North Star as we engage with our stakeholders and our customers in the bank in terms of how we wanted to go faster and to deliver faster. On the right-hand side, you can see some examples of these metrics, which, as Zach mentioned, if you had an idea and you wanted to get something from a whiteboard through to production, it could easily be measured in many months, if not years in some cases. Just getting access to data was difficult and could take days and weeks. And just even the creation of a simplified environment to do some data science work could take, in this case, 50 days. Just to bring this to life, when I started in the organization 4 years ago, as a data scientist, Python is your go-to language to do any work. It could easily take days and weeks for a new data scientist to get a basic Python environment up and running by talking to 10 different teams, trawling through wiki pages. It was a slow process. There was no standardization. There was duplication of effort, and just frankly a poor experience for our data science teams. So what we wanted to do was really focus on improving that, and that's what I'll talk about today. The curve you see on the left-hand side really shows you that kind of maturity for what we call ML operations. And certainly we've been on a journey over the past few years, and we were initially on that bottom left-hand corner, and I'll try and show today how we're now moving rapidly up that curve. So we had a few, as I mentioned, a few issues that we tried to break down and then to build what we call our machine learning operations vision. So some of the challenges we had really were in four main categories. These are people, process, data, and technology. So as Zach mentioned, we have 500 and growing, a really talented community of data scientists and engineers in the bank, but historically they didn't have the right training and support to work with the cloud. And within a large organization that grows over time, you have many existing legacy processes that really just get in the way of getting work done, the innovation and that time to value. Data access was difficult, data was siloed, and just led to frustration for our developers. And the tech stack we had was typically out of date, fragmented, and frankly not compelling to work with for the generation of staff that we wanted to recruit. So working with AWS, we built this vision for ML operations, but it's really focused on a few things. So one was standardization of patterns, both for the creation and management of infrastructure and ML models themselves. We wanted to use ML operations as a challenge to our governance processes and optimize where we could. We wanted to simplify that data access, and we wanted to modernize our tech stack to use the cloud, but supported by a federated operating model such that we could put the power and autonomy back into the hands of the data science teams themselves to self-serve and create those environments for their use cases. And ultimately, these components were tied together with a thread, which is all linked to faster time to value. How can we get that value from our data more quickly by being federated? So what we've done really now with AWS is centered on the SageMaker ecosystem. So I'll just briefly walk you through what this looks like at a high level. So first of all, we'll start with what we call our shared service account. So this is a central place that holds a variety of resources and artifacts and services that all the different teams and use cases across the bank will then rely upon for their own environments. So in here we have things like common Docker images that are then support our SageMaker pipeline steps that are stored in ECR. We have common and approved infrastructure products that sit within AWS Service Catalog, and other artifacts linked to the promotion of models from different environments through to production. That's owned and managed by what we call our central platform team. And then if you're a new team, you have a new project. Previously, you would have to go through a lot of design forums, governance boards, security checks to enable you to create your own environment, and that could easily take many weeks. Now what we have is a simple ServiceNow form that a team can complete, which then goes to that central platform team for them to then provision within the matter of a day a set of AWS accounts that data science team to self-serve for their use case. So by default, we then create 3 different accounts. We have a development, test, and production account. And these are all linked securely to our enterprise data lake that then ties everything together. The names of those accounts then link back to what we use them for in the data science development lifecycle. So in the dev account, you'll have data scientists working in SageMaker notebooks or in Studio building pipelines and projects. And they'll be using that for data analysis, data wrangling, and building those production-ready pipelines. The test account then mirrors what we have in production and is obviously used for testing, the integration testing of the end-to-end solution that we're building, all the inference jobs, for example. And ultimately, these things are then pushed through to production once you're ready to go. Once those accounts are created, then there's no longer any reliance on that central platform team. The technical lead for any particular use case or project can then self-service the creation of your user roles, your SageMaker Studio domain, and other pre-approved products from Service Catalog. So that then puts that power and autonomy into the hands of the teams themselves and removes the bottleneck on centralized platform teams. So that then gives the data science and data engineers the ability to get access to SageMaker Studio and start working in their notebooks and looking at some data to solve the problem at hand. I think for me, one of the big advantages that I've seen since we've launched this product is really the common language and the common process that SageMaker gives our teams. I think initially I was worried that it would be too restrictive and would limit innovation, but what we've actually seen is that it's almost liberating in a way, because we now have a common structure that a common language that teams can use to communicate. So now when I go into conversations with different teams across the enterprise, they're always now talking about SageMaker Studio, training jobs, processing jobs, batch inference. We now have these commons and modular components that people know how to use and how to plug together to give you your production-ready pipelines. And that just is giving that standardization and speeding up the time to value, because teams can just get on and focus on solving the business problem at hand. And this really helps us, I think, go faster, but also simplify and de-risk the development and launch of ML solutions. Once a team has then built some model that they're happy with, they believe it's going to solve the business problem, they have their pipelines tested and ready to go, we have another role that's available within this architecture, a model approver. So the model approver can then look at different metrics and numbers within SageMaker Studio to check for the performance of the model, look for biases, bias checks, look for explainability within how the model performs. And then in a matter of a few clicks in the AWS console, can then push that model, those pipelines, through into test and then into production, ready for the batch or endpoint inference jobs to run. Again, this is, for us, a huge turnaround. Previously, teams would have to have a bespoke route to live created every time they wanted to get something live. But now with this pattern we have, every team from inception of the project has that development, test, production, route to live from day one, so that they can really focus only on solving the business challenge and not have to worry about the management and maintenance of that infrastructure that's now handled by SageMaker. Once we launched this product earlier this year, we then quickly started to focus on the adoption and engagement of it across the enterprise. We didn't just want to focus on one or two high-performing teams to get this service up and running. We wanted to really democratize the access to it across all different parts of the enterprise. So we did a few things. First of all, we trained those data scientists and engineers, hundreds of them, in how to use AWS services properly. We set up a dedicated adoption squad, engagement squad, and they were really used to embed themselves within different teams across the different business lines to then get their use cases on board to the platform, train people in how to use it properly, but also, and really importantly, act as a first line, a conduit of user feedback which we could then use to further improve the service as we continued. We had users, we reached far and wide across the enterprise so that we didn't just focus on a few teams. We looked at teams across audit, climate, credit risk, even legal are now starting to talk to us about using this platform. So and we identified user champions within those communities to start to advocate for its use. And then in the center, perhaps most importantly, we were really clear and transparent about how we were doing this process and how we were visually tracking metrics linked to adoption and engagement so that people could see and our customers could see how we were progressing against our goals of going faster and getting that adoption at scale. Just to give you a little data point to show how things have improved, what you see here on this chart is how we've managed to rapidly reduce the time it takes a data science team to self-serve the creation of that environment. So before, as I said, it could easily take 40 or 50 days for a team just to have a very basic notebook or EMR cluster up and running to look at some data. Now with the launch of this service that I mentioned, we've taken that time right down to a matter of a day, maybe 2 days every so often. So that just massively improves that time to get started and means that people don't have to wait before they can start getting some insight back from that data. And then even better, once you have that basic environment up and running with those empty accounts, previously it could take a week for the centralized platform team to create that SageMaker domain before people would start looking at some data. Now with this self-service pattern that we have, teams can create that with Service Catalog and be up and running within a matter of 2 hours. So that was us kind of getting faster to start. And we now have that route to live. So that then allows us to go quicker to live. Okay, so we can now actually start to get solutions up and running in the enterprise and go from that whiteboard to something in production. And just to give you an idea of where we are now, so I gave you some of these metrics at the start of the presentation. It could easily take many months, if not years, to get a solution live. We're now pushing that down to a matter of a few months. Access to data could easily be measured in days, if not weeks. And again, we're now pushing that down to less than a day, and Zach will talk more about that. That route to live, again, that could easily take 6 months before because it was all bespoke for every individual use case. But now we have this standard pattern available, and it's now a matter of less than 2 weeks for something to go from a dev account through to production, still within our existing governance processes. And then the self-service creation of those environments could easily be more than 40 days before, and it's now less than a day. So what that really means is, what that translates to in terms of outcomes for our customers is that we can really champion the customer centricity. We really want to get that automation and that personalization to our customers and get it to them faster.
It also means when I ask you a question of have you started, you can actually say yes.
Exactly. So just to give you a little example of this. So a key thing that we saw from our data was that we had many, hundreds of thousands of conversations every week that our customers were having with us via the chatbot, via our telephony centers. But I think we never really understood what those conversations were about. And we realized that we had a few challenges. So one is that customers wanted to optimize and personalize the journey they had as they had that conversation with us. We wanted to give them more options to self-service for their support, to take the burden off of our centers. We wanted to improve customer satisfaction and our NPS scores, and then overall just improve our operational efficiency within those contact centers. So what we've done now is, using this setup that I mentioned, we've delivered some automated insights that allow us to use ML and NLP techniques to analyze those customer conversations from web chat and from call center channels to give us not only the reason that a customer was calling, but also then the resolution status of the call. And what that means is we can now create deeper insights to drive those personalized actions and improve that overall customer experience that we have. So just to quickly talk about that. So really what we have is every day we have over 100,000 conversations that our customers have with us, 40,000 via the web chat and 75 via the telephony calls. And we've used techniques like BERT topic, fast text classifier on those large data sets that we've collected over many years and months to then give us this insight into the reason of the conversation and the resolution status of the conversation. Okay? And I think that this may not sound impressive, but I think for us, we just simply couldn't have done this before without this infrastructure and this service that we have now within AWS. It did take us 6 months to get this service up and running. So that didn't meet our targets of getting below 3 months. But what we did was really break through so many barriers by doing this. This is just giving us massive acceleration for the next use cases that are coming after this. And I think having access to the latest ML models that sit within SageMaker and that scalable compute to train and then deploy models has really enabled this solution to go live. And just to give you an example, what this means is that at the bottom of the slide, you can see that for every conversation that we now have with our customers, we can have a clear idea of what we call the entity action pairs. So we understand that a customer was calling about cards and they wanted to order a new card, and then also understand the resolution status of that conversation. Was it resolved by the agent? Was it dropped? Was it deferred? And that insight can then give us the ability to personalize and optimize those customer journeys. And I think with that, back to
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just to highlight 2 things that Greg said. So you saw the metrics that we use to drive the costs down, the speed of our ability to deliver, and our scale up. I think one of the benefits of the environment that we built that we didn't really expect and didn't really measure, but is the accumulation. So now we have all those data scientists starting to contribute code, be able to reuse code, and learning from each other. And that common language and common tool set is really accelerating, I'd say, not just our route to live, the speed that we get our environment, but actually the learning across all of those teams. And I think what's been surprising to me is, as Greg said, the units across the bank can be very siloed, just like the data. But the reality is now the couple of data scientists that are sitting in legal and trying to analyze all the contracts that we sign are now learning from the team that's working in risk and working in other places. And that's really quickly accelerating their developments, their ability to bring things live. And frankly, also the learning across the bank. The general training across all of the users of this platform has really contributed to our ability to swap and change and move people to projects, but also for them just to share and collaborate. We just had our big conference of all of our data science and kind of what we would call our community of practice around data science last week. And the amount of projects and things that people were showing was quite incredible. And most all of those had started now on this platform. So we have a huge backlog. We've gone from only a handful of models to now, there's more than 40 models on the backlog for the platform, and it grows every day of how many things are actually being developed and worked here. The other thing I'd say is, I think in the CCI space, the customer conversation space is essentially all of this call log data wasn't viewed as anything except for just a capability for us to check conduct. And now it's rapidly becoming a real asset for the bank. So all of this conversations that we have is a real capability for us to understand the intent of our customers, our operational resilience, our operational efficiency, and being able to do conversational intelligence across all of our channels, wherever there's chat or voice or even video, has proven out in a very quick way to generate a massive amount of value for the bank operationally, but I think also just in our ability to go back and adjust journeys and change things and improve what our customers are experiencing. The last thing we'll talk about is sharing data. So I think the big unlock for that next cumulative set is the sharing of data across the bank. And so we've made a few different attempts at that, but I'll talk about kind of each one of those. So the first thing that we had to do is really scale up our data lake. So our data lake is getting larger and larger. We're also in the process of completely moving that to AWS. And giving access to it across the bank. And then in addition, building out a feature store. So the bank had a feature store that was being used in 2020, but it was really small. It wasn't cloud-based, and it wasn't really fit for purpose. So we had to build out a pretty large feature store for all of these data scientists and all of the models that were being built, and give federated access to contribute to that, which has been incredibly effective. The challenge with those two is that they both essentially live in the data and analytics environment. They don't necessarily live in the other account structures, say, run by our finance teams, our risk teams, or the legal team that I was talking about before. And so one of the things that we're really pushing hard on now with AWS is the ability to look across accounts, to be able to use some of the Athena capabilities to be able to bring that data in or even materialize it into another account, and enable people to bring, instead of necessarily having to go and move everything around all the time, but actually be able to go into another account, look at what the data assets that they've built, and then decide what exactly is needed to bring into your feature set for the model. That's still going. It still, I'd say, takes a little longer than we'd like to be able to get all the approvals and go through the governance of that, but we're quickly changing that too. I think we'll have that down to a pretty small list pretty soon. That includes shifting a little bit of how we think about access controls in the bank, which is a pretty big process change for us. The third thing is really, and then I think one of the other things that's happened is as we've started to use the ML models in this common framework, we've really started to build bigger and bigger data assets that incorporate more data together. One of the largest, and I'll just give you an example of this in the customer space, is our CLV models. So we started building customer lifetime value models that were very expansive in terms of the amount of data that were brought in from all kinds of different sources. Our traditional account structures, spending structures that we've talked about, but also credit scores, risk scores, bureau data, education background, anything that we could find to try to understand our customers over a longer time frame. And these assets have then, as we've gone into production, been brought into our feature store. So these kind of big model efforts to understand intent and get insight for long term are really contributing to the feature store and then getting reused for everything from fraud models to legal models to even customer journey models, and actually also influencing some of the customer intelligence work that we were just talking about on conversations. The result has been a really big gain. For us, one of the interesting things is we actually started this on-prem. So before we had the SageMaker environment available, and then as we've rolled out our customer lifetime value models across the businesses, we've been able to actually start to move the last ones that we produced onto the new environment, or not move them, but initiate them there. The speed up has been incredible. It's kind of like a perfect experiment. So we've basically had an improvement of about 10 times on training. We've gotten to model inference better, about 4.5 times to 5 times faster. And the models are able to be much more complex and much more comprehensive as a result of the move to SageMaker, which has been pretty incredible, I think, for us. The last step for us is to think outside our organization and not just go buy data, bring it in to enrich your models, which I think we all do already, but really to think about how might we share. Because the beauty of, I think, the AWS environment is not just that we can bring a lot of data in, that we can put it close to a whole bunch of compute, and that we can generate models faster, but actually all of us are on AWS. So why can't we share insights and inference about customers across all of that? And so we've been working in partnership with AWS to build a banking insights platform that'll allow us to work with partner non-competitive banks and be able to share the underlying models. In our instance, for example, one of the things that we've had to build is our own transaction categorization model at an incredibly detailed level in order to do insight generation. So now we're enabling that to be shared through APIs, but also for people to bring their data into a clean room environment where eventually, as you guys heard from Adam yesterday, we'll be able to run those models in the clean room environment and never have to move the data back and forth between our accounts, but be able to generate and share the insights across them. I think one of the things that's been interesting to me is in banking versus my industry before this, we actually don't have that many customers. So I worked at Electronic Arts, the video game company, for about 15 years. And in that, we had hundreds of millions of monthly uniques and billions of customers in our data set. And the result was we could generate lots of insights. We could personalize at very high levels. We could run very large testing controls because we had this very large customer base. But really, no bank has hundreds of millions of customers. And they don't have as much interaction as you do in gaming. So the ability to test and learn is limited. So I really think the opportunity for us as banks is to be able, and financial services institutions, is to be able to come together into clusters and be able to share those insights across. And luckily, both through the clean room technology, but some of the other ways that we're thinking about this sharing, we don't have to share PII, we don't have to run into privacy problems, but we can learn from the insights, the tests, and the models that we're all generating in order to be able to generate bigger benefits for us, but also ultimately for our customers. And so this is the journey that we're on now, is to find a partner to bring into this. We're talking to a number of banks around the world, but I encourage any of you to reach out to us if you're interested in joining our alliance around sharing customer insights and transaction data and being able to provide a different level of service for your customers. I'd say the contrast for me between what banking thinks engagement is and what a video game thinks engagement is radical. And no bank is even getting close to what our customers, especially younger customers, are going to expect in a few years. And we really have to rapidly alter our expectations around how people want to engage with their banks and with their financial institutions. So let me just summarize. I think our goal was originally faster to start, quicker to live, and share data, build data assets that could be cumulative and beneficial over time. What we found is much more. We found that we can have a huge impact on our customers, that our scale is larger than the walls that we work in, and that the cumulative capabilities of the bank have been unlocked by building out a common data capability, a common modeling capability, not just put all the data in a big data store, which is the old world, but actually have a framework that thinks about the whole production to live. When I started as a data scientist 25 years ago, well, we didn't actually call me data scientist then. I think I was called a statistician or something like that, or an advanced analytics person. My job was to build a model and then throw it off to somebody else to go code in C++. And that's an incredibly inefficient way to build models. Models now are pieces of software, and we need to treat them as such. And if we can incorporate the whole road to production and everything that we've learned to build great software, then we can scale the way that we build models, the way that we bring insights, and the impact that we have much beyond anything that we'd ever expected before. I think that we'll have, in the next couple of years, we'll be running thousands of ML models across the bank, fully governed, fully controlled, fully viewable, fully explainable, fully checking for bias every day, and we'll have a radically different bank as a result of that. So I think we're open for questions now.